Have you let people in?
Yes.
Greetings and good evening to all of you here and there and everywhere. We are launching our 5th Zoom and live hybrid salon. It is our 18th year of Live and Learn. For those of you who are just joining us, Live and Learn comes from my great-grandmother, but you all know somebody who said, well, live and learn, child, live and learn. So that's exactly what this series is about. It's also about Lucille Clifton's poem that ends, each one, teach one, each one bring one back into the sun. And so Chautauqua is a process where each person is simultaneously the teacher and the learner through that dialogue and through that exchange. Each one teach one, each one bring one back into the sun. We started with the notion of animating democracy, the power, the explosion of energy that crossed America after George Floyd, that turned common people and detached people into powerful citizens as they took to the street and as they organized for change. And now what is the question? What do we do with that power? What do we do with that energy? What do we do with that exchange? And so the series this year, sponsored by the Commonwealth Monument Project in collaboration with our partners, the Dauphin County Library System, and housed here in the brand new Chester Welcome Center and Research Collection, has set the stage for animating democracy. Our work is grounded on the first statue to African Americans and the first statue that honors the 15th and 19th Amendment in any state capital in the United States, which was placed on our state capitol on the site of a valued but now vanished African American community called the 8th Ward. It was the 8th Ward because of its power of African American citizens, their collaboration in the building of their wealth, their dynamic leadership, which placed them in primary positions on the city council by 1910. And by 1912, we saw the eminent domain, which wiped that community off the map, but not the memory of those young people and their descendants who are the change agents for America. Now, we can't bring back the neighborhood. We're not about rebuilding and reconstructing like a theme park, the old 8th Ward, but we can call their descendants to task. We can call those who contributed to their work to task. We can pass the torch to a new generation. The monument is a tribute to the 15th and 19th Amendment. The 15th Amendment passed in 1870 and the 19th Amendment passed in 1920. And the 50 years between the two that it took for women to receive the right to vote. It's also built upon the catastrophe of 1920, where race riots started across Pennsylvania and across the country. And the results, like Tulsa, like Wilmington, were the burning down and the destruction of economic communities of color. And so we ask ourselves, what tools, what tasks, what conversations should we have that work as blueprints for that work? I grew up in a family that talked about their 30 acres and a mule. And I always thought that 30 acres and a mule was a euphemism. But in reality, it was an 1840, 1860 plan of what it took to feed a family of 4 for a year. And if you had 40 acres and a mule, you could yield security for your family, enterprise, and potential generational wealth, the passing down of real estate, the passing down of terra firma, the passing down of ground. And so this evening, we're going to start talking about the dream that Martin Luther King dreamt and the message that we flooded on Monday, and the real work that Martin Luther King did. Because he wasn't only a dreamer, he was like, you got to go out and build your dream. You know, you got to work on your dream every day. The dreamer must be the carpenter. The dreamer must be the architect. Martin Delaney, each people must be the architects of their own destiny. So that's why we start with our first guest, Jason Graves, from the city of Harrisburg, who are helping small businesses, sole proprietors, entrepreneurs, dreamers, schemers in the best sense of the imagination, and planners to build out the promise into the reality. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you, sir.
And it is great to have you with us, and your energy for your task is amazing. But I'd like to start with a kind of personal cameo, and tell us about the road and professional journey that brought you to the Harrisburg City Administration.
It's a long road. So this is, I can say this, I am very blessed to be in the role that I am in under the administration that I am. I actually applied for this position now, probably about 3 years ago. This is like during the current times of when Patrick was in office. So they were actually going through an abundance of changes, obviously, and obviously they probably thought that the re-election was not probably going to happen. So they basically cut ties with a lot of people that were actually in the administration, actually brought about a new fresh blood in.
So let me pause for just a minute and say, for those of you, because our audience, some are in Canada, some are in Ireland, some are in Florida. So Jason is part of Mayor Wanda Williams' administration in Harrisburg, the capital city of Pennsylvania. She was the president of the city council before for a very long time. And Eric Poppenfuss was the mayor for 8 years. Wanda is now completing the first year of her administration.
Yes.
So that's a Jason, you are here, kind of GPS, you know, for our audience.
Thank you very much. Previously before that, like the road, it leads to a lot of things. Just like you find yourself in a lot of different avenues. And like I say, a lot of people in this day and time, you have to have a lot of tools in your tool belt to actually work through different situations. So prior to this, I actually did small business for Citizens Bank. I worked for, I always say this, I probably skip past them, but I actually used to be a product manager for regional for LG, which is Life is Good, through a 3PL, which was through Central Pennsylvania, now towards Pittsburgh. Let's see, going back again, Whirlpool Corporate, actually regional in Washington, D.C. area, through Washington, D.C., Virginia, and parts of Pennsylvania, dealing with store products, small business, new businesses, actually bringing businesses in, dealt with big box as far as Best Buy and also Sears locations. One thing I could say about being blessed with having the DC area, they had a store called The Great Indoors. There was only like 10 of them in the country. So the cool thing about it was you get to see every single piece of high-end equipment possible known to man that probably it's probably cost of a car, like from stoves, refrigerators, from like Viking, Thermador, everything like that, $20,000 up. So yeah, you're dealing with a lot of stuff.
So let me go back and go forward, because there's a lot of good stuff here. Folks, I want to ground GPS again. We know where you call home now,
Yeah.
But where was your genesis?
Here, Harrisburg.
Harrisburg, you're born in Harrisburg?
Born and raised in Harrisburg. I am a John Harrisburg High graduate of 1997.
John Harris, that's great. Mr. John Harris is name is on the monument. He's one of the 100 voices, and you will find his history here in the library.
Yes. Going on from John Harris, actually went to Lincoln University, and transferring to North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University down in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Okay, bingo. 2 more things I want to plug in for all of you. And that is Lincoln University, a treasure in our historically Black colleges, an icon in the nation for graduating civil rights leaders and social rights leaders. And just a personal piece of my own history, I wanted to go to North Carolina A&T because of your football.
I'll tell you a funny story about
You know.
So yeah, the football team's pretty good. The funny thing is my dorm director, Mr. Kamara, he was actually Jesse Jackson's roommate. That was the funny thing. They actually met each other on a plane coming to North Carolina. That was the first time they actually met. And then when they actually got down there, they actually ended up finding out, which is funny. Mr. Kamara was a very, very funny man. I don't know if he's actually still alive now. He was pretty old back then, but cool, very cool guy. Very cool dude. I say that much. Very funny.
So we've plugged in 2 of our very important institutions. Lincoln University as part of the original founders of the historically Black colleges, and North Carolina A&T, another incredible contribution to the leadership, and one of the schools which have the Divine Nine
And the Greensboro 4.
and the Greensboro 4.
And also the first African-American astronaut.
And the first African-American astronaut. So some pedigree there. What brought you to this kind of work?
Oh man, like I said, I guess I went backwards to go forward. So the thing is, my major when I was in school, I was actually graphic design. So I'm an actual artist by trade. I've always been, still am to this day. And by doing that, you are going to get in the midst of basically people that do deal with business. So the one thing about business is like when you start going through the grass of a lot of things, one thing in particular with actually from the 4 parts of actually starting a business, which is all paperwork and trying to figure out how to do a business plan, so forth, so forth, all the nuances of what you need to do with business. The most important thing about a business is branding. Because if you don't have branding, you're not going to succeed in it. And that's from businesses to even personal life.
And all of our bells are going off because we've been talking about branding, in corners and boardrooms and in emails. So how do you define branding?
Branding, it's a lot of definitions. One thing I would like to say about what branding is the identity of self.
Branding is the identity of self. I often talk, Paris, about the great galactical blackboard, like a blackboard that would be above my head. I would write that on it. Branding is the identity of self.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is, because you have to identify yourself to know what your product is that you're actually trained to.
So the job that you applied for, help our viewers out there in our virtual audience that are not in Harrisburg. Would you define first the description of the job that you applied for, and then flip it and tell us the description of what you found once you got the job?
Well, the description of the job, which basically you hit on it when we first started talking. I am the Director of Business Development, part of an economic development team with the great Denise Hill, who is the Economic Development Director. Our goals and our jobs are basically to help small businesses throughout the area, residents throughout the area. One part of that development also as well, and also planning. That is the main segment. The other side of it, my other title along with that, I am the alert administrator, which actually deals with localized tax abatement.
Localized
tax abatement.
abatement.
Yeah. So
Is this a federal program?
You could say so, and also along with state and different counties, because it goes by municipality. So depending on what the municipality reaches as far as like their tax abatements, as far as when they're actually doing development or redevelopment, there can be an abatement apply to your property or your parcel.
So I'm going to ask those of you who are in our virtual audience, if you would kind of Google while you're listening, Lorda is the Lerta.
Lerta.
Yeah, Google it to see if it's in your area, and then you might have some questions for the chat after. So yes, sir. So that was the job that you was that bad English. Start again. That was the job that was described and you applied to. Give us a state of the state of the, what was the condition of it when you sat in your office?
It's, for the most part, it's still the same. It's still the same definition of the job. I would say it's a lot more of, I wouldn't even say a lot more hand holding or anything like that. It's still, I would say it's still the same definition of the job. It's like the main focus of the position is actually helping everybody. And the wealth of knowledge that I have, and also dealing with and reaching out to multiple different factions of different groups and community organizations and local and neighborhood organizations, where the whole thing of economic development and business development is actually to work all those parts. So we are not basically running ourselves thin to try to cover everybody, because we don't have all the resources in one particular entity to do everything. So there is a plethora of resources out there within the city, within the county, within the state, and throughout the US that can actually help small businesses. My job is to help funnel you to those different avenues to actually help you out. And that is what I'm actually going forward through this year, through 2023, to actually get that information out there visually more, so everybody can actually hone it and actually get it. So there is I would say, for within what we could do as far as a community here, as in the city of Harrisburg, and people that are probably watching that are from the city, and you may attest to this maybe through your own town or through your own city. I know Mr. Paris said he could probably attest to because he's from Harrisburg. A lot of other people are from Harrisburg. One thing is, if everybody watched city council meeting, I know a couple months ago I've said this. One thing that I say that a lot of what we don't do in Harrisburg is actually work together. And that is a big thing. So if you go to other areas with any city within this area, it's like, for instance, I know everybody uses Lancaster as a big example, it's a big fun project, because Lancaster City and Lancaster County actually work together, which is cool. The only thing about Lancaster City and County, which is different from here, Lancaster City is not a capital. So you do have there's a lot of things, pieces that they don't have to go around as far as what we do, because again, we are the capital, so we do a lot of state entities, a lot of it's property, which raise taxes, which raise a lot of things. And the order to combat that is actually bringing small businesses or larger businesses and actually creating a larger culture to actually come into the city of Harrisburg.
And I want to go back and highlight a couple of things for those of you who are in our virtual audience. This notion of not working together. And that can apply to every community. There are these, could you help us with that? Go through that again about the challenge of getting people.
Yeah,
work together.
It's not hard. The one solution to that is everybody can stop trying to be king. Because again, at the end of the day, when you have different multiples of entities, everything trying to be king, there's never going to be a solution, nothing's ever going to be fixed.
You know, Jason, my father had this saying all the time: you gotta have turf before you have turf wars.
That's
you know, and he said, you all fighting over stuff and you don't even have any turf yet. You at least work together until there is something to fight over. It seems to be systemic and endemic in all the communities that we serve.
Yeah, you have there are a lot of great people here. There are a lot of great businesses here that are inside the city and outside of the city. There are a lot of great organizations here also. Is just trying to hone everything together as one, because we can hone all these resources as one collective versus individual. So I would say this before you say, I could say so. So I'll say this: I would say a good perspective to look at how a city can grow as a capital and actually use the resources they have, pull everything in, and also pull in residents, and also create a culture is Raleigh, North Carolina. Raleigh, North Carolina is a capital, and Raleigh put in basically an initiative many years back. And from living down there, every city besides Charlotte works the same way. So you have basically colleges that actually run the revenue and the population. Most, like majority of the towns and cities in North Carolina. So I always use this. I use this analogy a lot. It's like you're living, like we just had the pandemic, but when you live in a state like that, it's like you live in a pandemic a couple times out the year, because the population rises and falls every single year throughout at least 4 good times out the year: summer, winter, Christmas breaks, Thanksgiving, so forth. Raleigh actually was starting to lose a lot of things, and actually things were going out to different areas or different states or different cities. So they focused on the culture part and actually pull a lot of things in. So you have a big influx of residents. Housing is basically off the hook because you can't find a home in Raleigh, and they're bringing a lot of companies as far as like that. Google, they're gonna have a Nike campus, and also I think there's gonna be an Apple campus going on. So that goes into the subject of, okay, you're bringing more influx of people, Raleigh's spreading. What are you going to do in part of that, which actually brings culture and brings people in, which is transportation. So there were talks about them actually going light rail. So again, you can funnel in home people from our surrounding areas to bring things in. That's something that could work here because, again, everybody knows when you're in certain areas, especially in central Pennsylvania, the transportation is not the best. So how do you funnel everything together to work as one? So if you have a bigger transportation system, everything can work together. So for instance, my idea of a light rail, you bring a light rail in or some rail system, you can actually bring in shorter routes for possible transportation, for bus routes, and actually have more. There are areas in the surrounding areas where there's an issue with housing. So there's a lot of people that don't actually want to move out to certain places because the transportation is not likely to be with them. So there is. And I know I'm not.
No. You're doing everything we need. Yeah, I'm saying open up your toolbox, put the tools you need in it. I just need to ask. You pointed out something that some of our listeners may not know, and that is Harrisburg is simultaneously the city, the county seat, and the capital. So the city, county, and Commonwealth have to negotiate. It is also a federal port and a city and a railroad junction city. So the federal government is woven through practically everything we have to do. So how do young, new entrepreneurs approach this very complex landscape? By landscape, I mean geo-economic landscape. And what does your office provide us besides Safe House?
Okay, so possibly and hopefully guide you and give you the tools to actually move in the right direction. One thing, I'm going to backtrack on one thing as far as like the King things, people not working together. As of now, within this administration, there is a lot of partnerships. I'll say that between us, the county, a lot of different partnerships and fractions around within the area, which is a great thing. Utilizing us to actually help you point in the right direction to go to basically the county or talk to somebody at the state level or so forth. It's here now. So it's like the one thing is, like I said, there's a lot of stuff that actually has to be reevaluated, reinvented. It's not like reinventing the wheel, but there's a lot of new things and ideas that we have to push forward with the old to actually blend them together. So that's one thing. And I would say this, I had this conversation through a workshop I did with SBDC in December when we were doing the introductions of ourselves. And one of the things is I said was that there needs to be more businesses within the city. And his question to me towards the end, we have to go back around for the 30-minute spiel for everybody. This thing was, okay, so if I bring my business into the city, one quick question is, what are you guys going to do about the park? So funny. So I had a couple questions. I had a couple answers for him. And it was very, very easy answer. One, we don't own the park. And again, everybody has their own conclusions. I'm not going to get into that about the whole parking scenario from the previous administration.
Let me pause for a minute, good brother, because you don't own the parking is not good enough answer.
That's where.
Because it's like, but still, what are you gonna do about it? It's still a.
Exactly. So the other part of that's a double-edged sword. So the other part of that for that answer is basically it's like for most part everybody here has been in different cities and visited and like everything like from Baltimore, DC, Maryland, Virginia, New York, whatever. So you go into a major city, you don't have to pay for parking. And the thing is, you have no problem, no issue paying for parking because there was something for you to do. So if there was something for you to do, you wouldn't have an issue about paying for it. Working in downtown Philadelphia, I paid that. It was cheap for that, but I was paying $38 a day to basically park my car and walk 3 blocks down the street. So, so, and like I said, Baltimore Harbor, I think it's what $50 a park at the harbor, depending on where you're parking at. New York City is a completely different case. DC also is a completely different case because you're dealing with paid parking over the rolling dice parking in a what's the I can't remember the name of it. It's a whole bunch of them down here, permanent parking, and you're on rolling dice because your car might get towed. So it's just like it's a give or take. And I get it with the whole parking thing, but I also get it because there isn't a lot of things for you to come downtown to do except for come pay a ticket, maybe go to a restaurant, and that's it. Parking's free at 5:30.
And now I need to catch up with you, but folks, translate to the community that you are in, the issues that he's talking about. Translate through your Google, who is the equivalent of Jason in your community, who might be addressing these issues, and who you might partnership with, and translate this concern about is there something to do? Jason, we asked our audience when Kamika Campbell was here several sessions ago. We said an African-American family is having a family reunion in Harrisburg. What 10 Black things should I take my family to see?
That's a good question.
So let's talk about that for a while. Let's think about it. What would you put on the list? Now, it's a Black family. We have pride in our church, in our legacy, in our community, and we're here in the capital city of the fourth, most powerful state in the union, and we want to show off our Blackness. You can translate this to an Asian family or a Latin family if you want to, but the exercise for now is, what 10 Black things could I take them to? I'm talking about tourism, visitorship, retail, enterprise.
Retail, yes. Food establishments, yes.
Name some, and you all can participate too. We're planning the itinerary.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
It's hard for it to be this hard. Crawdaddies. We all be at Crawdaddies. Crawdaddies, by the way, is the Creole restaurant here.
The Commonwealth Monument.
The Commonwealth Monument. Yes, but you know what I'm saying, and you know what I'm saying. Why does it take X number of people in virtual land and Y number of people in this room this long to even think of what to do downtown? Why enter the capital city? We are 3 cities in one, by the way. We're like a creature in another body because 8,000 plus people come here at 7:45 in the morning and reside here for about 12 hours and then roll out about 4:45. They impact the city in one way, but the city is desolate after they roll out. So if I'm a Alpha Kappa Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi, Omega Psi Phi, Zeta Beta Phi, Oma, you know what I'm saying? And I'm coming out of the Hilton on the main street in downtown Harrisburg. What am I going to show off?
So
you got the closest eye. So I'm literally asking you.
I got a close eye. So I can There's a couple I can name off the top of my head, but this is what I'm going to do instead of doing that. So I would say three. I mean, it's not even one, it's three. Three stigmas about the city of Harrisburg. And it's so funny when you say this because I looked at two planning, like this planning designs or whatever for proposals. And in each of these proposals, and it's the same thing, it's the same exact thing when you go towards and most likely everybody in this room can say what those three things are. How you describe the city of Harrisburg in basically three sentences when somebody thinks about Harrisburg, if somebody wants to come here. One, it's a good place to raise a family. So they're talking about all the extended areas around Harrisburg. Two, basically it's not expensive to actually live here. That's number two. Number three, it's 2 hours away from every major city. So to answer that question, how do we change that narrative versus making Harrisburg basically a transient place to the destination? So that's the answer to that. So we can go and like spit off like a million different restaurants or so forth, but the thing is, everything is home. That's what you do. So like, for instance, like Washington, D.C., for example, I know they're real big on food tours. So in certain areas, name me an area where I can get out of my car and actually walk the strip in the block and actually go to multiple restaurants, look at culture, and actually get a history tour. It's not too many. And Harrisburg does have a lot of history here. The thing is, how do you hone that culture into one thing to actually make it more prevalent to everybody who actually comes here in business and maybe make them alternatives for us.
So I'm going to ask if we can pause here, change guests for a minute, and then as our next two guests speak, then we'll pick it up here, because then the notion of volume of experience that the cultural climate and heritage stewardship of a community is what gives it its destination prominence. And you have convinced me that this is a good place.
It's an amazing place
To live. I'm still trying to figure out what to do with my guests.
Yes.
Because 44% of the people who come to Harrisburg come to visit friends and relatives. They are called VFRs. It's just friends and relatives. They sleep on your sofa, they breathe your air mattress, all that. The first day you're happy to see them. The last day you're happy to see them leave. But in the middle, you got things to do. And what do you tell them to do? Where is the vitality? So we are inviting all of you. I wanted to say green book, but I'll call it a BIPOC book. We are trying here at the Chester Research Center and Welcome Center to collect that multicultural information about what visitors and host families should attract their guests to.
That goes, it's like you were saying, a call to order. That's a call to order to a lot of the residents here. Also people who are actually wanting to start a business or actually do anything culture-wise in business. I had a conversation with the mayor about this the other day. I talked about this quite a few times. There are a lot of vacant storefronts and properties within the area, within the city. And the whole thing is they're open, they're ready to rent. So to the public, what do you want to do? So do you want to continue to keep complaining about it or basically be a part of the solution? So when I get it, people are looking at price wise, depending on how much things cost and so forth and so forth. I understand that. But it's also about vision, being visual to a lot of people. So if you go to a place that's $300 for rent and there's nothing else around you as far as foot traffic, you're going to see.
So this is the place where I want to pause for to introduce our next two guests, and then we'll come back to this conversation at the end, because there's several challenges here. The one is the vitality of the cultural and heritage experience that a family wants a child to grow up in. The second is the 44% of the tourism business, which is the second largest industry in the state, is being controlled by local households. And most of our local households, with all due respect, when our guests say what is there to do, we say nothing. So we do, so we need to like work on that kind of, So we'll continue that conversation. And I ask you if you switch places with Paris, and we'll keep building on.
Yes, sir.
On this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much. We want you to put your questions in the chat. We want you to put your questions in the chat. We want you to continue to send your questions our way. Those of you who've been with us in the series know that we'll get your questions answered if you put your email in, and we'll send them back. So brother, I spent about 30 minutes trying to figure out what to wear tonight. When you came, it was going to be slick enough to sit next to you. And I was like, I kept coming up with old man clothes, but welcome, Paris, London. It is a joy and a privilege to have you here. I want to jump right in with how you first picked up the needle.
My name is Paris Williams. I'm a fashion designer and a tailor. Born and raised in Susquehanna Township, Harrisburg, PA. But initially how I got started, I actually started out doing comedy. I was a professional comedian and I did very well. I actually got offered like a 25-week tour from Monty Love, but my son was growing so fast and I would go for a weekend and come back and he would learn Spanish. So I didn't want to do that. And plus, you had to pay your dues, and being in the bar every day is very secular, something I'm not really into. So then in high school, I used to draw pictures a lot. And so I wanted to be an artist and draw. But then I realized they don't make money till they die, and their family gets to spend all the money. And like the man cut his ear off and painted a picture. Yeah. And none of that money. And they mention his name every day. Yeah. So I thought, like, what can I do now that I can see an immediate impact of what I do? And I literally decided overnight to learn how to sew. So I couldn't even sleep. It was like God placed like a mustard seed in my head and it started growing immediately. And I stayed up all night. I went to the thrift store. I didn't even know there were patterns or anything. I just went to the thrift store and bought a button up and I took it apart piece by piece. And I cut it and then I figured out a sewing machine.
A butternut pattern. All of those of you whose grandmothers made your Easter dresses, you know about butter.
That's what I had to learn later on, but I just taught myself, and I wasn't the greatest, but I realized I had something. And so I started, what was I doing? I was working construction and I prayed about it and I really wanted to change careers, and I bluffed my way into a job for the art director. I didn't even know how to use the machinery. It was really, really bad. Like he came in and I was like, I asked him one day, why'd you hire me? He's like, I like your sunglasses. I'm like, okay, that was weird. But he never checked my credentials. So he comes in and he shows me one thing and he's like, I'm gonna need you to make 20 of them. I'm going out of town. I'll be back in a week. Wait, what? And so he left out of town. I actually had to go to the repair store in Union Deposit and act like I was getting it fixed. I kind of purposely broke it so that I'd take it and they would fix it and explain it to me how to use it. And that was a surgery machine. And like, yeah, it was pretty wild. He came back and never knew I didn't know anything though. Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of good stuff in there.
Oh, man, it gets crazy.
But tell us about your time and your experience with Project Runway.
Oh, okay. So in 2018.
This is our mic over there.
Okay.
We're talking to them and them. So you.
I got to talk a little about it. In 2018, I was still working for UPMC Insurance, and then I got my income tax, and I decided like to take a risk. So they actually fired me for no reason, and they were wrong about it because I was actually doing business with the owner of the company, but the management didn't like me. So one day I missed a few days, but the owner knew, the management didn't. I come in the next day, they fire me. I don't even get upset. I can just kind of like, okay, have a nice day. But then the owner calls me back later on that night. He said, Paris, I didn't know this stuff happened. Come in tomorrow morning, we're gonna do something about it. So I go in the next day, and then they're like, they give me a speech, and everybody's talking about he's late, he does this and that. And then he says, what do you want to say? And I can speak freely on here. My mom, he said, and the CEO, everybody, all the managers are talking about me, like 12 of them. He's sitting at the head. He's like, Paris, what do you have to say? I said, can I be honest? He said, yeah. I said, my mom said you were a dumbass for having me here today because she knows I was late and never showed up. And he liked that about me so much. I don't know what it is. He liked it. So he's like, we're gonna put you on a new project. We're gonna pay you $17.50 an hour. How do you like it? I said, I actually came here to let you know I didn't want to come back and that I want to go pursue my dream. And if it doesn't work out now, 6 months to a year, could you hold a spot for me? And like, yeah, and it was like crazy. I left the rest of the room dry. Everybody else didn't know what to say, but the owner, he was smiling so hard. He's like, you're darn right. Whenever you want to come back. And everybody was just freezing, so I got up and left. And so I went to my dad's house and I started making clothes. And my mom begged me because I was just doing fashion shows, not making real money. You don't make money doing fashion shows at all. So she was
We
like,
got a couple of footnotes here, you all out there.
yeah, don't do fashion shows. Don't pay people to show your clothing like that. As far as fashion show wise, it's a waste of money. But my mom begged me and she was like, could you please just apply for Project Runway? And to make her happy, I did. And it was a long application. And I didn't think anything was gonna happen of it because you had to do like a process. And all of a sudden I get an email. I made it through the first part. I'm like, that's kind of weird. And then I get another email. I'm like, I made it through the second part. And then the third part, you had to show up and do something, blah, blah, blah. But I got an email after that saying, you don't need to do the third part, come to the fourth part. I'm like, okay, this is getting kind of real. So it was really, really rough. So I went to New York. My cousin stays in Queens. I stayed in Jamaica, Queens. It's really crazy. But I learned how to take the train and everything. So the first day I get there, and it's a room full of people. Mind you, it's New York, and it's exactly what you think it is. A bunch of people, artists dressed differently, everybody weird, got their own swag to them. And I loved it. And so then I'm like, all right, what's gonna happen next? So I kind of kept my mouth shut, and they take us in this room, and they call your number. And in the room, there's about 40 or 50 seats, like 40 or 50 seats, everybody's in the room. And out of nowhere, they'll call your last name and your number. They say, Williams, you come up. There's about 6 racks. And this is just to get onto the show. This is not actual the show. Like I'm going against 2,000 people just to get on the show. And then they'll bring up the racks and then this guy will literally walk in. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. He says no, you pack your stuff up and take it home. I had to go through that about 10 times. It was very nerve wracking. I think, oh man.
You had to go through the no 10 times?
No, I got yes every time, but like you would go up.
Oh, you went through the
no,
rounds
yes,
every
no,
time.
yes, it was rounds. You go sit back down with your stuff. They would do a few other people. They would call you back up, and every time you can see it getting better and better because every time you go up, there's different people up there.
So let me pause.
Yeah.
So how did you navigate that many times? What was your
Niche?
your center?
For one guy, and then secondly, I'm a real artist. If you throw trash on the floor right now, you say make something out of it, I'll figure out a way. So I have the ability I look at things differently. I really can't explain it. I don't even know why people, sometimes I don't know why they like my art or they look at me like, wow. And I'm like, it's not that hard, but so.
By the way, I took a picture of the jacket.
Yeah.
That this is just for those of you who know me so
Yeah.
well. The jacket in your shop.
Yeah.
That I showed my son. I'm gonna have this made for my son. Said, please don't wear that, Daddy. Please, like, it's just a little too thin for you. So I need to come back and ask you some questions about silhouette. You're like later on.
I can take care of you. I like your style. I really do. But like I was saying.
So you got on the show.
Yeah, I got on. Actually, I'm still competing to get on the show. So this took 2 days. I had to go through that nerve-wracking process for one day, and then they don't pay for hotel rooms or anything of that nature. I didn't know what was going on. They're just like, all right, come back tomorrow. Where should I go sleep? So like, I had to go back to my cousin's house because I didn't plan on staying there. I thought they were going to put us in a room like the real world or something, but it didn't work out. So we come back the next day. They have the same process for the second day. I leave and I come back the third day. The third day, they narrowed that thing down. Now they're getting us prepped to be on the show. So they're doing like more, instead of doing the room where they did it that way, they put us in a private room, they mic us up, they put a camera, they put the 3 judges in front of you. Now, the only thing about that is said in the requirements, it said, don't bring any formal wear, gowns or evening wear. So no suits or anything of that nature. So I bought everything else but. So again, they start putting me up. Now it's only me against one person. It's not me against multiple people. They bring us up and put us in front of the people with the camera. They did their thing. I made it through twice. The third time, I'm like, man, this is going well. I'm really about to like take over the world. I didn't know what was about to happen. And then this French guy walks in. And then like, I look at his thing and he has gowns and suits and all that stuff. I said, yes, they're gonna send him home. Oh yes, I automatically won. That was my first lesson, like in business, push the limit, because I'm thinking they're gonna send him home. They're gonna tell him no. They just turn on those lights and camera and start judging us immediately, like just judging us. And I'm like, hey, if you judge my evening wear, it would be close to his or better, but because you told me not to bring it, it didn't happen. But I knew not to say that on camera. I just kind of took it as what it was. And that man wiped the floor with me and they sent me home. And it was funny because I was so sad, I started crying outside of Penn Station. And my stepdad's from New York. And I called me, he's like, are you crying? I'm like, yeah, man. He's like, where are you at? I'm like, in Penn Station. He said, wipe your face before you get robbed. Because I'm literally holding the soul receipt, sit on cry. He's like, wipe your face before you get robbed and stop looking people in the eye.
Yeah.
He said, Harrisburg people do that. In New York, you know, not to look person in the eye because it could be crazy. He said, we're from Harrisburg. We just look everybody in the eye that walks by. So they told me to stop doing that. And so, yeah, that was my experience with Project Runway. They asked me to come back, and one thing I learned, I want to choose my 15 minutes of fame. So I want to do it my way.
Well, so pause here and give our virtual audience the lesson learned there.
The lesson learned is learn how to take a no and don't let it scare you. And if you really want something, I don't know how to word it, but the best way I can, you have to press that limit. Because that guy, like I said, he wiped the floor with me. And they said in that paperwork not to bring that stuff. But now I'm looking back, if you really want something, you want to dominate, I should have threw a few pieces in there and see what they said. If they say no, I'll take it off when we get there. You know, but I learned to push the limit.
Push the limit.
Not to cry at Penn Station.
Not, you're right. And wipe your eyes.
Yeah, wipe your eyes or you will get robbed.
Yeah.
Thank you my dad for that one. And it was just, I don't know, use your uniqueness. Like we spend a lot of time trying to fit a mold, look a certain way, but if you don't really know how valuable you are, when I started showing my person, that's what got me first. I don't even really think they like my clothes that much. They think they like me more. I was talking and stuff and telling jokes, and like your personality can get you really, really far, being yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's take the journey from Penn Station to 4th and Chester Way, Walnut Street. What was that journey from Penn Station to your current studio?
I'll make it brief, but I'll tell you the truth. So I worked for UPMC. I failed at Project Runway. I didn't want to go back to UPMC and let them know, so I started picking up odds and ends jobs. And then I met a guy on Craigslist 2018. Craigslist, he was refurbishing an antique mall. And like he was young and he was a minority. And he was like 2 years older than me, but he knew real estate and everything. So I started working for him and I helped him refurbish an antique mall from bottom to top. We refurbished back to the original. And then afterwards, he sent me to school to be an appraiser. So I'm an appraiser right now and I also manage the store. So I was working for him for a while, but I was really devastated because I spent all my money at Project Runway and I had no money. So I had to go get a job. And I have a wife and 2 boys. So I didn't want to make them struggle. And so I worked for him and my mom just kept telling me, I worked for him almost 3 years. And she just kept saying to me, work on your dream or you're going to be upset in the end. And I'm like, no, Mom, he's promising me to make money. I'm making good money. And I was a little devastated and butthurt from what had happened with the Project Runway and trying to get my career started. So I was nervous. And then I worked for him for 3 years. And then one day he just said the wrong thing to me. And that's what really got everything started again. I was telling him about making clothes and blah, 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 blah. And he says, Paris, if you're not going to be about it, stop talking about it. It's a hobby. I'm like, whoa, you didn't really know me before I got here. He didn't even know about Project Runway. I never mentioned it. And that kind of lit a fire in me. And then I go to work and I used to bring my son to work sometimes to sit with me. And after he said that to me, it like bothered my spirit and my energy. It was like, and it made the defiant syndrome come out in me a little bit. So I'm sitting there literally, and my son said he was 10 back then. And I'm like, Cameron, his name is Cameron. I'm like, Cameron, do you believe Daddy can make clothes? He said, yeah. I said, you really do? He said, yeah. I said, so you don't think I need this job? He said, no. I said, are you sure? He said, no, Dad, you can make your clothing and sell it. I literally got up at that moment, walked into his office and said, Richard, I'm sorry, I gotta leave right now. And my son's sitting there with this look on his face like it's not really happening because he watched me work for 3 years. And then I was so broke that day, he had to give me my paycheck in cash just so I could get a ride home, like literally. And so we're halfway on the Uber home and my son was like, Dad, did you really quit your job? Yes, I did. So I quit my job. I started doing pop-up events. And for my first pop-up, I started making money. And then the first few, I did very well. And then one day, I'm not even gonna lie, I don't even know how to explain it. God spoke to me. He said, you trust me? I said, yes. He said, then trust what I give you. And that's my talent. So I'm sitting there making clothes. And I told my friend, I'm going to Atlanta on Thursday. He said, but you haven't spoken to anybody. I said, I spoke to God. I'm going to go. And he's like, but you didn't speak to anybody. I said, I did. I spoke to God. I'm going to go. And so he leaves my house. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm coming with you. You got that look in your eye. I got to go spend some time with my girl. So he comes with me to Atlanta. The first 2 days, I just drove out there, mind you, just got a hotel. First 2 days, it didn't work. The third day, I met one of my mentors that I've always looked up to. I walk in, I lay my clothes out. He says, I only like these 2 pieces, the rest are horrible. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know what to do. And I was kind of broken down. And I wanted to meet up with a rap artist while I was there that I had been speaking to prior to, but when I got out there, he didn't answer anything. So it's literally Sunday morning. I wake up crying my eyes out, but I end up meeting this guy that worked for the New York Times. And the first thing he asked me when I met me, he's like, are you famous? I'm like, no. And then we get to talking and I tell him everything. He's like, you notice if I asked you, were you famous? I'm like, yeah. He's like, I don't ask people that. You got the aura about you. But it still didn't work. So I drive off crying because I'm there for 4 days wasting money that I didn't have off a prayer that God has spoke to me. And I'm like, God, I don't know what the message you gave me. I'm spending money. My mentor didn't like my stuff. The artist is not answering the phone. I gave up. I said, God, I trust you. So I called my dad. He prayed for me. I called my wife. She spoke to me. And she said, a package came back. But that was the package I sent to the artist. And so I said, I just sent him the picture. And I said, listen, I'm a big fan. You sent this package back to my house. I really wanted to meet you while I was here. I guess it's not going to work out. I literally go back to my hotel and go to sleep. I wake up 2 hours later. The rapper sent me his address and everything. So I wake up and I ask my friend Chance, I said, should I call him? He says, no, get in the car and let's go. So we drive to literally a gated community and a pool house and everything. And he lets me in there. And pretty much right then and there, they paid me to make clothes for the rest of the day and gave me a room in their house. Then when I'm driving back home, the guy that told me he didn't like my clothes, but he owned the store, his security guard got me a pop-up in there, say $1,500, but he was like, come back in 2 weeks. Pay this $1,500, it will work out. Mind you, I never paid that much for a pop-up in my life. I never paid more than $100, but someone told me to do it. So I went home, I did more shows, I went back to Atlanta, and it was my birthday. And I spent my last dollar, literally, I paid him the $1,500, and it was the day after my birthday. And that morning of my pop-up, I woke up with only $16 in my pocket. Mind you, I'm in Atlanta with only $16 in my name. Don't know how I'm gonna get home, praying this all works out. For the first 2 hours, it looked like people were avoiding my clothing on purpose. And I'm like, why aren't they looking at it? I'm not gonna sell. I spent all this time to get out here and it's not working. Then I call my mom and she's like, you're worrying again. She's like, you always worry in the gray area, God gets you through. And she's like, what's the lesson you learned? I'm like, be patient in the gray area, there's someone on the other side. So I literally, I'm not even lying. I walk back in, I sit down like this and I'm like, God, I trust you. So I'm like, let me take a post right now. And then my friend was there, my friend started smacking my leg. I'm like, what? Get off of me. And I'm like, I'm just posting. And he smacked my leg. And I look up and his mouth is open. I'm like, why do you have your mouth open? You got your tongue. And it was Benny the Butcher. He was like one of the top rappers at Def Jam of the year, sitting right in front of me. And I'm like, that's Benny the Butcher. And the whole room starts laughing because I said it out loud. And I mind you, nobody touched my clothes for 2 hours. The first person that holding my clothes, when I look up, he's holding my jacket. It's Benny the Butcher. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? Is this a dream? I listen to his music every morning, but I'll backtrack a little bit. On IG, on Instagram, he had posted up some merch, and I just put, that merch is whack. I was joking. I wasn't thinking anything of it, you know? And then I go to sleep, and mind you, he's a Def Jam artist. I'm not thinking he's going to pay attention to me. And this is 3 months before I met him in person. And he's in my inbox, and he said, if you're not making 120K off of merch a month, you're not doing anything, you're whack. I said, listen, I'm sorry. I was like, oh, listen. And I was like, listen, I didn't mean to come at you. That was a joke. I just want to do business with you. He said, I don't want to do business with you. I don't like the way you came at me. I said, I can't listen to your music anymore because it got to be fake because you're too emotional to be a rapper. And it was just going all bad in the conversation. It was really, really going bad. And then he threats and all types of stuff. It was really, really bad. But then when we're in Atlanta and he told him my stuff, he's like, who are you? I'm like, oh, darn, no. He's like, where are you from? And I'm like, And he's just holding my jacket. He's like, this is so hot. And he's like, yo, where are you from? And I start standing up and I go, Harrisburg. And he goes, it's you. And like, we started arguing. I'm like, listen, I'm sorry. He said, first, he's like, calm down, quiet. Because we were talking about, he's like, first, you need to watch what you say because I really have people looking for you. I'm like, really me? He's like, you need to watch what you say. And secondly, he was like, why did you just tell me? And he was like, oh, you were trying to get my attention. I'm like, yes, sir. I was just trying to get your attention. I was not going to disrespect you. So he bought 2 of my jackets that day. I'm mind you, that was my favorite rapper, #1 rapper in the country at that time. And
So this is, I think he has our attention. I think there are a whole bunch of lessons. We're at a bridge where I want to introduce you to somebody, but
okay.
I need to come back to the question after our next guest of your vision for your shop at 4th and what Harrisburg calls Walnut,
Yeah.
and we have renamed Chester Way.
Yeah.
Because you are literally across the street from our monument, and you are in the vortex
Yes.
of the experience we want. But just one more question before
Hit me.
we actually, it's a 2-part question. Where do you want to go with that business next?
Pretty much, like I told you, God gave me a vision, and this over 8 years ago, and he told me where I would be. I'm only 34. He told me where I would be when I was 35. I mean, 45. I already know. So pretty much, they have what is it called? LMVH. It's a housing company, and they house Gucci, Prada, Moet, anything that's high class, like clothing, lotions, automobiles, socks. It doesn't matter. It's under that brand. He was actually beating Elon Musk during COVID to be the richest man in America. What I plan on doing is Lunden is my brand, and it's really 2 words. It means one of one in French because my name is Paris. I want mine to be the housing company, and I want to house all the African-American luxury brands under mine.
Perfect. There's a perfect place for us to pause and get our next. That is the work plan, the dream plan, the mission.
Yes.
Brother, you are intoxicating.
Thank
You really
you.
got that
Thank you.
energy. I'm gonna ask you to come back.
All right,
I'm sorry about your hand.
That's fine.
Okay. Paris, London. Tell you about tiny shop, big dreams.
Yes.
Tiny shop, big dreams. That brings us to our next guest, and it's a perfect transition for Tayyib Smith from Philadelphia and the Western world, because while his company and business is in Philadelphia, his work is in the Western world. And I turn to Tayyib when I have a question that I am not thinking Mark Smith high enough about, that I'm only seeing the 3rd floor of my question, and I need somebody to take me to the roof, and then, so I'd like to introduce you to Tayyib Smith of Little Giant and also Bigger Dreams. Tayyib, good evening. I'm gonna change over to this chair, a better view of you.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can. Welcome to the Chester Welcome Center and Research Collection, the first African-American research collection in the capital city,
Wow.
in the county, in the Commonwealth's headquarters. The only one dedicated to African-Americans and vote, and the center of research on about 100 families who lived in that once valued, now vanished community, the old 8th Ward, including researching the diaspora of those families and calling them home to come back and claim their image. You've been working the same way. Forgive me if I zigzag through the conversation, but you've been doing much the same work with the 7th Ward in Philadelphia. And by way of first introduction, could you tell us about your seventh ward is similar to our eighth ward and its history? And could you tell us about the work you've been doing?
Well, thank you for the invitation. Pleasure to meet you all virtually. The Seventh Ward project is something that my company won just before COVID kicked in through the Pew Arts and Heritage Award to do a monument and tribute to the Seventh Ward, which no longer is in existence, but historically, that was where the African-American community was based in Philadelphia. So the AME Church is at the beginning of the Seventh Ward at 6th and Lombard. That's also where W.E.B. Du Bois came in the late 19th century to do the study, the Philadelphia Negro, which was the first anthropological study of an urban environment in the Western Hemisphere, or the world for that matter. But it's he was brought by actually a descendant of the Wharton family to do a study on the Black community that was very rich and diverse here between 6th Street and 24th Street, between Spruce and South Street. So the first AME church in the world started in the 7th Ward, the first Black banks, Black theaters, people like Octavius Cato, a host of Black firsts existed in this community. And if I happen to live in the 7th Ward next to another AME church that's been in existence for 125 years. And if you walk around this neighborhood, I would say most of my neighbors don't know that history. So what inspired it was I was reading A Taste of Freedom about the life of Octavius Cato, as well as a book called Up North about the Black Philadelphia experience. And I was walking from Fiddler Square to what was my girlfriend and now my wife's house in Queens Village. And I noticed all the church names and the street names and the little blue signs we have all over the Pennsylvania. And it really frustrated me because through doing my own amateur research, I knew that there was a much larger and deeper story to be told that it's really hard to get, and 30 to 150 words that you might see on a small plaque. So we applied for the Pew Arts and Heritage Award, won that, I think, in 2021, and are now in the process of creating that tribute.
There were some really incredible young people who I met through you with your work with the Philadelphia Mural Project and James Holden, who were doing research and writing stories and creating imagery. And would you talk a bit about them? Across from where I'm sitting here in the Welcome Center is the Children's Center of the new, and that work was some of the most impressive.
So the way that we prototyped the idea and kind of developed the narrative to submit our application to the Pew Arts and Heritage Organization, we seeded it with Mural Arts' education program, and they do cohorts of youth in the summertime. So we basically created a program and a curriculum where young people would learn the history of the 7th Ward and then create their own narrative stories, whether through painting, film, music, poetry, to kind of highlight that history. So it was an experiential learning experience that we embedded in the Mural Arts program. And they're also our partner on the 7th Ward Tribute. I added a link in the chat as well.
Tell us about Little Giant.
Little Giant's been around for about 16 years now. When it first started, it was when I was making a transition out of the music business. And so our first clients were mostly nightlife events, large nonprofits, alcohol companies to produce events, creative content, videos, the host of experiences that I was able to draw from when I was in the music business. So our early clients were Red Bull, Vitamin Water, Scion, which was a Toyota company, Heineken USA, we had a contract with for about 10 years to do events in Philadelphia and New York. And it's basically a creative agency that ebbs and flows with the number of clients that we have. We've gone as low as 3 people. We've had a staff as high as 15 at different times over the 16 years.
And the very exciting space at 15th and Chestnut, I believe.
Yes, it's at 30 South 15th Street between Market and Chestnut Street, and it overlooks City Hall. So in 2010, 2011, I moved my company and my team out of a recording studio that I used to share with the Roots organization. And we moved into what was an early version of co-working. And I won't give you the granular details, but it inspired me and a former partner to develop a business plan to create our own. And I went to the person I knew who knew the most about real estate. And he told me it was a great idea, but it wouldn't work. And then I bumped into him about 2 years later, and he said, I need to talk to you. And I said, sure, let's get together in a couple of weeks. And he said, no, I need to talk to you Monday. And he basically wanted me to revisit the idea of creating a co-working space. So oddly enough, this was before co-working became popular because of companies like WeWork. And a very resource real estate developer had our plan and had a building that was let's say underwater, needed to be refinanced. And he knew that if we got the right co-working partner, we could right-size this building. Long story short, through an analysis, I found a gentleman who had one co-working space in Miami. I went to Wharton. I got the rights to develop a space in Philadelphia. And my first real estate deal was a 20,000 square foot, 2-floor co-working space on the 15th to 16th floor in Center City, which was probably about $2.3 million project. And through that, I learned sweat equity and what a sweat equity deal was. So I'm a partner in that business. It has anywhere from 200, 250 small businesses that are housed in that. And that experience encouraged me to start a development company with another gentleman who's more experienced in real estate. And I now have a pretty significant commercial real estate portfolio because of that experience.
And I want to go into that portfolio for a minute, but before I do, I just want to say that it was so amazing. It is so amazing to walk into his co-working space. There have been some days when I've come up into that space where I have been so disheartened that I was like, I'm retired. And I walk in the space and just the energy, the force of that many creative people working, kinetic energy, aura, force field, the force majeure of working in that space. And also I have to say, Tayyib, working in such a clean space, because we work in garages and basements and laundromats turned into places, but to take the elevator upstairs, with my own code, and to walk into a space that was bright and clean, the dynamic of the space is its own product. Would you talk just about that, that community inside of you?
Well, thank you for that. Aesthetics are very important to me. I think they have an effect on people, both psychologically, physically, and spiritually. But I would go back to one of your first guests said something about brand and the power of brand. If you have a business, you have to think about your brand. So we were imagining the aesthetics of the space before it was even, a thing. And if you don't, if I think about my parents and my grandparents, being sharp, as they used to say, getting fly, was really important, particularly for people who were marginalized. You know, how you present it in the world was very important. And I, you know, from a aesthetic perspective and a physical perspective, design has always been very important to my work. And it's a way that you, you know, can create an environment that is aspirational. And that was with intent. And I think, you know, to kind of go between what I've heard from some of your earlier guests and, you know, from where my work is going now, you know, as African-American people, we have all often had to take the scraps to make something beautiful. So, you know, soul food is a delicacy that came from the scraps of other people's tables. When I heard you talking about, you know, where are 10 places that you can go in Harrisburg that are, you know, have a Black aesthetic, you know, that really speaks to my heart, because in the city of Philadelphia, although we are 44% Black, only 2.3% of the businesses are Black owned. If you walk around Center City, it's really hard to get a tangible Black aesthetic experience. You can go all over the world, you know, from Berlin to, you know, Paris to, you know, any small town US, and you can find a Thai restaurant, or you can find a, you know, Mexican restaurant, or you can find a sushi restaurant. And that really speaks to, you know, from a business perspective, we're just starting to get beyond the point, you know, through colonialism and imperialism and white supremacy, anti-Blackness is so ingrained and so normalized that the fact that we don't have a, you know, a standard Black business aesthetic in every major city in the United States and small town where we make up a considerable part of the population is something that we have to have an imagination to improve on. And the normalization of not having desirable, aspirational, you know, strategic Black space is something that is a through the line that inspires my work.
Now let's go backward to go forward, if you don't mind. Let's go backward to your work with the rap and music industry. You lay that thread in for us.
I was fortunate. You know, I was born in 1972. I'm 52 years old, and this is the 50th anniversary of hip hop. So a lot of things that became in vogue, I had the good fortune to be at in their early gestation. So I had a relationship with hip hop culture that existed before hip hop became pop. And that gave me a worldview that, you know, I said to you earlier today that I consider myself to be a hip hop entrepreneur, even though I'm not working in business or entertainment in any capacity. But one of the things I learned from hip hop, similar to what I said about soul food, is that, you know, I could take the scraps of something and assemble a team to create something beautiful, or that I don't need the indoctrination or the, you know, the labeling of a university or a business association to tell me that I can, you know, do tangible, transformative work in any sector. So I didn't ask for an invitation to go and, you know, to create creative agency. I didn't think about going to work for other people would ultimately be in my long-term best interest. So as a serial entrepreneur, coming into things with curiosity, you know, demanding a certain level of quality, you know, figuring out how to work with people who are more informed or more talented than you, and the spaces where you're weak has given me the agility to continually move through different business ecosystems.
And your time with Roots, you talked about your time with
So I was a roadie for the Roots, you know, in 98, 99. I used to manage Questlove as a DJ. I produced events for him, for Amir, Questlove Thomas, Tariq Trotter, Black Thought. Through learning what I did for events, I did things like Jill Scott's first record release party that she ever did. I've created cultural moments using what I've learned just being a lover of Black culture and working with artists, corporations, transnational businesses to create experiences. Yeah, actually, when the Mr. Paris was speaking, it was reminding me of my youth and all the different ways, I might have experienced some of the same things that he did when he was in Atlanta in a different capacity.
So I started out talking about the reality of 30 acres and a mule and the equivalent of what that would be in real time, not a mythology. Let's go back to your development. Your 30 acres and a mule is an impressive portfolio. Would you talk about your development and real estate, and power and legacy of handing down ownership?
So, again, if we think about space, years ago, before I was in real estate, I went on this journey through some partnerships with Knight Foundation and some other organizations. And I looked at things in Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago that I had always looked at with the Philadelphia lens. And when I got to these other places, I saw how culturally, we had the same experience, through redlining, through housing covenants, through the Highway Act, that basically uncoupled the things that we created, prior to, during, and after the Great Migration, that created, Black civic and cultural and business infrastructure. So I got into real estate by asking resourced real estate developers what I now know were very naive questions, but they got me into a different space. So, when I was a child, I lived in what is considered North Philly, but now it's called Northern Liberties. It was called Northern Liberties 150 years ago. In the late 90s, they started calling it Northern Liberties again. And in the period of transition, I got really frustrated because there were buildings that I had seen probably for 25 or 30 years. And 6 months after they were torn down, I couldn't remember what was on a corner. And it started to make me feel like I was losing, my faculties and my understanding of my environment. And I asked a couple gentlemen, how do you do real estate without displacing people? And the majority of the people shrugged. One guy asked me if had I ever played Monopoly, and said that's the game. And two of the gentlemen who answered me empathetically became business partners. So I say that to say curiosity, research put me in spaces that helped me develop the skill sets to look at real estate from a space of like, how do I get ownership?
We've talked a lot about the rise and fall and rise again of Black enterprise. And we've talked about what happened to Tulsa and to Wilmington. What happened here in Harrisburg in 1921? Very few of our guests realize that at the same time that women earned the right to vote in 1920, there were fierce race riots across the whole 8th Ward and burning down buildings because of the threat of that change of power and that change of dynamic. And this story is true to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and its Hill District, and Detroit, and inner Harlem, and Baltimore. And we find these places of the coming together of a Black economy and a Black enterprise, and then a violent destruction. You know, 100 years to build up a Black business district and 14 months for it to be decimated. And a year later, we can't remember what corner our grandmother used to live on, where the favorite ice cream store is. And you've been traveling across the country and seeing this against what is referred to as enterprise and redevelopment and restoration, and what is sometimes also called, well, I will not use that term in this public place. But, you know, is the destruction of the memory of success. And would you give us in this January, we're still in our Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream week, you know, we are still in call to action week. What would your call to action to young Black entrepreneurs be? And what would your call to action to the economic paradigms and equations of businesses that support them be? What would your advice to Paris be?
So I'm going to go around the block to get to where I want to go on that question. Because first you mentioned MLK. And, you know, my mom used to call me on Martin Luther King's birthday, and she would joke to me, I just wanted to make sure you were working so that you could catch up on the white people today. And, you know, she would always use humor to, you know, tell a story. She would call me randomly sometimes and she'd say, are you ready? And I'd say, ready for what? And she's like, pick up the baton. A lot of people are going to die who are in power. And I don't feel like your generation is ready for it. Right. So that's the type of environment that, you know, I grew up with a spirit of inspiration. And when I hear people talking about a day of service for the most marginalized, you know, people who basically blood, sweat, tears, and you know, lifespans have built the contemporary capitalist economy, it always frustrates me because if anything, I think his day of remembrance should be a day of strategy or a day of protest. I would also say to young people and young, you know, African entrepreneurs, POC entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, that sometimes we often think that we need to network up, or we need to get to what the kids call plug, or you need to, you know, get that contact with said rapper. But what you should be doing is collaborating and strategizing with the people who are closest to you or in close proximity with you. And if I think, you know, historically, there used to be a thing in the Seventh Ward called the Benjamin Banneker Society. And within that, you know, 15, 16, 7-year-old men, gender bias of the time, studied history, philosophy, arithmetic, you know, arts, culture, Latin, and people like Octavius Cato and the, you know, were a part of that, those salons, we'll call them, similar to what we're doing now. I think it's really important that people have networks of support to explore, create, and learn together. So I think it's really important that entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs in general, support each other, but support each other doesn't mean like always buy each other's products, but being a support network to build upon, whether that's investing together, figuring out how to put, you know, apply for debt together, going to your civic infrastructure and making demands that are in your best interest. You know, first time I had been in Harrisburg and memory was last fall. My good friend, David Dix at Luminous Strategies asked me to speak to the Black Mayors Conference. And I came to Harrisburg and there were 20 African-American mayors there. I never knew there were 20 African-American mayors in Pennsylvania. And I think it was the first time they had ever gathered in that capacity. And when I listened to them talk about the the issues of Allegheny County, the issues of Harrisburg, many spaces that I've never been to, they were all similar, right? The same challenges that the county, predominantly white county might have with the Black urban core were the same. Some of the same things the gentleman was talking about, available, desirable space that might not have a lot of walkability, kind of spoke to those issues. So in general, I would say people need to be strategic, strategize. I think people need to lobby in a cooperative fashion from the institutions that are supposed to be serving them.
Could you tell us some projects that you have seen as you travel that you think are exemplary projects or blueprint models or case studies which we might search for, visit?
Well, first two things that came to mind, I have a friend and mentor in Chicago named Theester Gates. And I participated in a salon he did in 2017 called the Equitable Development Salon. He's an artist, urban planner, and wears a lot of hats. And at the time, he had 45 buildings in his portfolio. And he has a place called Stony Arts Bank that used to be a bank that is now contemporary museum / library and film space. He also has a restaurant and a bookstore in close proximity to there. It's exemplary in its ability to house both historical and contemporary Black culture and create spaces for people to learn, live, and thrive. And my wife and I went to Oaxaca, Mexico, last summer, and I'd never been there. And it was just really inspirational to see a space. There's so many different indigenous ethnicities. I think there's like 76 in the state of Oaxaca, and the diversity of experiences from a food perspective and an art perspective that were intertwined there. I had never been any place where you could talk to someone who's I think it's I can't say the tribe's name right, but they can talk of 7,000 years of their people's history in that region. And it was just really inspiring in a way that I have never experienced anywhere in the US. So sometimes you've got to go, far to get close. And it's always been healthy for me to see things that can give me a reboot or a refresh at how to look at, something I'm going through or my people are going through.
You remind me of a quote of T.S. Eliot's, that sometimes you have to go out a long distance out of your way to come back a short distance correctly. So you've got to travel and see other models. You have to move outside of the sometimes self-induced, sometimes economic myopic view of the world, but shift your world. I'll give you another example. El Paso is in our news a great deal because of the immigrant situation, but El Paso has a project, Jason, called Downtown Saturday Night. And it is a very exciting project. What they do is all the boarded up stores on their downtown, they give to artists to do pop-ups in the door, outside the door. And the first year they did, the city said, we won't turn the lights on because it costs too much to light that block. And so they organized people to park their cars and turn their street lights on, their car lights on the windows. And it is now one of the fastest growing cottage industry. People who make handcrafted things and limited line editions are not able to rent a space, but they're able to get a storefront. It's also revitalized the notion of the safety of that downtown boarded up street. This is the point now where Paris, you get to ask either Tayyib or Jason a question, or make a comment, or pitch. This is so if you have a.
I mean, I'm just in awe learning from what Jason does and learning what you do and how you know your craft so very well. And like you talked about it thoroughly. You talked about yours back and forth. And this made me think, I can't wait to hone in on my craft and have, you know what I mean, the information that you guys have. But definitely need to speak to you in reference to growing your business. I do have a store downtown in Harrisburg, right across from Strawberry Square, like you spoke. I do custom tailoring. I make suits from scratch, everything from scratch. That's kind of my thing. And yeah, I'm glad you have me here.
And our Pennsylvania Pass players wandered by his shop one day. We were in period costume. He was leaning out the window looking at us. We were leaning in the window looking at him. We were like, this vest needs to be redone. So we will actually have some transport business. But I encourage you to connect with both Jason and with Tayyib, the models that they have in Philadelphia. There are things that Jason brought up this notion of working together, you know, and we focused on it several times about my dad's, you got to have turf before you have turf war. But we have to also think of regionalism. You know, we know now in national markets that there are things called Cleavesburg, you know, which is Cleveland and Pittsburgh, you know, and Washington, which is Boston and Washington. And my favorite Tayyib is Mylanta, which is Miami and Atlanta, but it's actually really good for what happens in Miami and Atlanta. But these regional markets, we have to see ourselves bigger. Jason brought it up. We are sitting in central Pennsylvania. We are 8 hours drive from 51% of the population of the United States. Think about that. 51% of the population of the United States can get to central Pennsylvania in 8 hours. And travel till that since COVID, that 74% of travelers are traveling in that auto. Now that's going to take us to the parking issue, you know, but we do know that we are a center, but we compete with Lancaster, we compete with York, we compete with Carlisle. When our market doesn't see those boundaries and those differences. So, Jason, how do you see us solving our challenges through regional partnerships with other communities?
Well, it's a good thing it's a good question. I've already had quite a few meetings about that. So, especially a lot of partnerships with Lancaster. So, no, Lancaster say, I see you going to the end. I got to talk up something. Move up one. I see you move to closer to the screen.
Yeah.
So, let me come up here.
Yeah,
So,
take that.
so with there's a lot of areas like Lancaster, York, you have Carlisle, you have Hershey. Everybody knows about Hershey Harrisburg, that whole Visit Hershey Harrisburg thing. And also around Lebanon and so forth. There are a lot of areas that actually want to work together. It's just trying to get over the hump of everybody actually working. So for instance, like you have, like again, you have the city of Harrisburg. The population of the actual city of Harrisburg is around 50,000 people. That's for the city limits. The actual surrounding area is looking at about 300,000. So again, but they don't count that as the actual city. So you have, and I throw Stilton in there and all those other areas. So for Susquehanna Township, Lower Paxton, Swadera. And if you combine us, Lancaster, York, Cumberland County, you say Perry County, Carlisle, you have almost about the same population as Philadelphia. So the thing is, between
anything regional, one of the issues, again, it comes back to transportation. So it's just like everything is drivable. And the thing is, when you have drivability a lot, it takes out the aspect of culture. It makes everything drivable. I have to go here, I have to go there. So you have areas around us like Hershey. Hershey's booming. Hershey's doing a big thing, but I know Hershey also would like to have some kind of pathway to go versus everybody driving to it all the time. Because I found out the other day, there's a lot of people that live in will stay in Carlisle to drive to Hershey. Right. It makes no sense. So it's just basically making everything close knit versus everything distant.
We have people who stay in York but drive to Harrisburg and Lancaster as part of their regional experience. We also have, Tayyib, an incredible story here in that we have the only statue of Thomas Morris Chester here at the Capitol, and you have the only statue of Octavio Cato in front of your city hall in Philadelphia. Chester and Cato were together the grand marshals of the Grand Review. It is a story that's on the two ends of Amtrak that runs 7 trains a day between the stories. So I'm saying, let's not compete about that story. How can we build these Cleesburgs, Atlanta, how can we build these regional partnerships and regional ownerships? The competition of those spaces and those communities, to me as a planner and a tourism and marketing person, doesn't make sense in the pattern of what Mark Smith I'll call the end user. The end user doesn't see those bounds. The end user doesn't stop. They may shop in Harrisburg, play in Hershey, and stay in Carlisle. So we have to think of Black business. Also, Tayyib and I are a part of a coalition of folks who have been looking at the color convention model of the 19th and 20th century, where there were statewide convenings of Black entrepreneurs and Black leaders. And they moved, they were in Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh in alternating years. And we tried it with the Francis Project of bringing people who share that story or share that market. And certainly the Philadelphia to Harrisburg network of business owners, of entrepreneurs, of thought leaders needs to be cultivated. We have some time for questions from our audience or comments, or and we'll also take some from the chat. Yes, sir, Mark.
Well, thank you, Linwood. I wanted to commend all of the speakers. They, just the information really spoke to my heart. And, it reminds me, and there's a discussion here about the old 8th Ward, and what happened to the old 8th Ward, the old 7th Ward there in Philadelphia, and then Tulsa. But this speaks of the resiliency of the African American community. And just briefly, one analogy that was brought to my attention a while back was that there were these 2 shoe salesmen who were here in the US, and they both were working at the same company, and they were both in the same small town over in Africa. The first one comes back and says, oh, he was distraught. He said that business is terrible because no one over there is wearing shoes. The other one comes back elated, almost dancing on top of the table, saying, oh, business is great because almost no one over there is wearing shoes. So we create our environment, the community is what we make it. And the three of the guests here are great. You're creating the environment. So I applaud you for all of everything.
What we want to tell you is it starts with the fire within, pyramid. The fire within, in the middle. It starts with the fire in the middle. if you don't light that fire and generate, and if you don't see through adversity, see your progress through adversity. So progress through adversity, how do we build up? Yes, sir.
So Lenwood, just an idea, because you mentioned the statue in Harrisburg and the Cato statue in Philadelphia. And I thought about, like, how can you create an experience that, families would drive from the Cato statue to the Harrisburg Capitol to the August Wilson Museum
Yeah.
and Pittsburgh. And if you can get people in the Northeast, if you market that to from Maryland to New York State, and then you move on to Ohio, you have an experience that creates an economic development engine that has people going along. We'll build our own Silk Road, right? And that's connecting all the different touch points where there is an African-American, first and historic. I just remembered also there is a Frederick Douglass statue at Westchester University. But we could go beyond statues. There's small businesses, there's eateries, there's art studios, there's arts galleries. But if you could curate an experience that is drivable or through Amtrak, that gets people from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, you have something you can build on year after year. The other thing I thought about is now that I've been to Harrisburg recently, you've got a lot of larger spaces where there should be something annually that is addressing Black business in the state of Pennsylvania or BIPOC business in the state of Pennsylvania. And you should probably do it during the congressional calendar so that you can also lobby and make demands of our political representatives.
And we talked in our very first thing about animating democracy about Frederick Douglass's quote, which was agitate, agitate, agitate. That we have to push constantly to hold the ground, just to hold the ground. I'm a tango expert. 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. That is the crisis in Black America right now. And so even though I know how to do the dips and the turns in that tango, I see us pushing forward, Jason, at the time of redevelopment decay and boarded up housing and so what is the strategy, gentlemen, to work forward in enterprise as we see cities shutting down resources around us? Give us some advice if you can about that tango.
One thing I'm gonna say, I'm gonna reiterate what Tayyib was saying earlier about the developers that he was talking to about how do you go about not displacing people. So within the city of Harrisburg is very small, and and just like everybody else knows, when there's an issue or problem, people go to city council, they'll contact city hall, so forth and so forth. So the thing is with that is even if when you do have developers come in, you still have as to write your own narrative of how your neighborhood, how your community is going to go. And a lot of people don't understand that you do have the power to do that. So, and as far as like displacing people or pricing people out, one thing that I see a lot of where it comes to a constant like revolving door with a lot of people get priced out because you got to think there are a lot of people that don't own. And that needs to be something that is, I would say, more permitted to out in the open to get people into know the information that they need to know. It's like first time home buyer classes, credit classes, so forth, to actually get them to be in ownership so they can actually be more of a part of the community and actually own a piece of the community and have more of a stake in it.
And that was the plight of our old 8th Ward at the time of the eminent domain. 2/3 of the Black families in the old 8th Ward were tenants, not owners. So the buildings were sold away from them and they were scattered without any kind of control of their.
So Lenwood, even in a, whether it's 125th Street in Harlem or 52nd Street in West Philadelphia, most of the commercial corridors, even in what looks like blighted neighborhoods, are controlled by people who don't live in those communities, because it is great real estate. And sometimes people are, holding their assets for a time when we won't be there, right? And there's a cliche in real estate that goes back to the Napoleon era, and they say, when there's blood on the streets, buy land. Right? If you walk in many of our neighborhoods across the nation, there's a lot of blood on the streets. And what that does is those who are middle class or upper middle class or poor and have the agility and ability to get out, they do. And when you do that, you suffer from cultural erasure. You lose, the grandmom who ran the civic organization. So what's happening is through, the marginalization of poverty, right? Where we are satisfying that with treating the sickness versus the cause, right? So the police budgets go up, but people are not investing in the economic stability so that people can live in the 21st century economy, right? So everything that we're talking about needs a holistic vision for the future, from cradle to grave. And I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, and whether it's in philanthropy, nonprofits, municipality, real estate, my time in the music business, they are all structures that have not been designed for us to live and thrive. And to be naive of that sets you up, right? So we have to approach everything with a capacity for imagination for us to thrive. And many of the solutions that are often given to us for our conditions are pittance, right? If you displace 20,000 people, you might make, something equitable for 500, right? And we have to create courageous leadership that has an imagination for some of these spaces and corridors to be Black and Brown controlled and intergenerationally, so that we have the stability, so we don't hate coming into these same cycles of displacement.
Thank you very much. I want to ask, are there questions from the chat? We have a few minutes left. We'll invite you all to speak amongst yourselves. We have refreshments for you before we leave, so that you may share your thoughts from this.
I wanted to say something too, to go inside with Tayyib was saying about the blood in the streets by land. I have a friend of mine from West Baltimore when the Freddie Gray incident happened. I remember I talked to him on the phone about that. That's the first thing he said about something. Because he knew. So,
well, it's many dialogues that have to occur before we can build an action plan, because we're also building it on one part history and one part changing world. And you have one foot on history and memory, and you have the other foot on the San Francisco earthquake that is changing, changing the economic dynamic and political and social situations of class, race, equity, and parity. A question from the chat room?
There is a question for Mr. Smith from Eric Jackson.
Yes.
He says, you must have known the late James Shady or Spady, iconic journalist and pop culture agent in Philly. Have you published anything that highlights all your work, templates for others to learn how to use their own network to brand their own projects?
Did you hear that? You're on mute.
I'm not sure if I knew James Spady. Often, within the history of hip hop, we have different things we call each other in the streets. So I might have known him. I don't know. But
Right.
to your point about any writings, I'll put another link in the chat for the Institute of Hip Hop Entrepreneurship, which is the incubator we created with the assistance of Knight Foundation in 2016-17. We basically created an accelerator using the history of hip hop to inspire young people to start their own businesses. That's probably the best example of some of the templates to Eric's question.
And another question?
Not from the chat, just lots of thank yous and appreciations.
Lots of thank yous and appreciations for you coming. I never know if you're out there. I always pray that you are. We are going to pause with some time that we have left in this room and have some refreshments and socialize. We're going to leave the chat open for until 7 o'clock. If others have questions, if ever comments, resources, each one teach one. Each one bring one back into the sun. So take something away, put something in. You know, my metaphor is gumbo. Gumbo here. So, you know, you take something out of the pot, put something back in, okay? And we thank you very much. Thank you, Tayyib. You all need to go to Philadelphia and just get off the elevator and stand in space. You know, drink up some of the really incredible creative. We also know that the primary product of our Animating Democracy series is thought, change, and gathering. So I have given you the opportunity to invite each other into chats and into your own salons. And I thank you very much. On February 16th, our thought leader is the amazing Roz McPherson from Philadelphia, who has worked on just about every major museum project and gallery project. And she's going to be talking about institution building and the longevity of vision of institutions. Our change agent for that day is Dr. Wanda Knight, who is the Diversity and Equity Director for HAC. And she's going to give us an X-ray into the condition and health of this whole diversity, equity, and inclusion thing. There is a spike in hiring equity and inclusion directors, which is now falling off. So people were trying to get past the notion of wallpaper and window dressing your organization and into, so she was going to talk about that. And we'll also have the young dynamic Elise Irvis, the granddaughter of Kay Leroy Irvis, who we spoke about a lot, talking about the responsibility of carrying on that legacy and the challenge to make her own signature on history. So please come out and join us, hold that date. We appreciate the Dolphin Kind Library system. We constantly applaud the professionalism of Ashley and her calm ability to guide us through this experience. And this, I end with, we talk a lot about mothers today, you know. So my mother's favorite saying is, you don't need to leave, you don't need to go home, but you have to leave here. You know? So we're gonna say goodbye for you. For now, we'll see you next month, you know, talk to each other, exchange each other's emails. God bless you till we meet again.
Hey, Mr. Smith, this is me. This is Jason. I'm gonna need your information because this is stuff I want to bend your ear about.
Okay, just have Lenwood connect us.
Yes, sir.
He has my number and my email. I look forward to connecting with you.
I'm hoping the three of you get a hookup going on, okay? Thank you all very much, Dr.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and the board of
Take care.
the museum for being with us. Thank you.